There are moments when the math just stops adding up. When a country's debt gets so massive, you start to wonder how it could ever be paid back. Well, today, we're diving into a really fascinating theory about how the US government might be dealing with that exact problem with a hidden strategy. Let's get right into it.
So, get a load of this number. The source material we're looking at projects that by late 2025, the U.S. national debt is going to hit $38 trillion. But honestly, the number itself isn't even the craziest part. It's the speed. The chart is going almost vertical. We're talking about a borrowing pace that's completely unheard of outside of a major world war.
Which, of course, leads to the big question. How in the world can this ever be repaid? I mean, your first thought is probably, well, they'll have to cut spending or they're going to have to raise taxes. But the theory we're exploring today says, nope. The government has zero intention of doing either of those things. Instead, they've picked a different door entirely. And that fourth option has a name: financial repression. This is the absolute core of what we're talking about today. See, the idea isn't to pay the debt back dollar for dollar. The plan is to melt the debt away by making the dollars themselves worth less. It's a quiet, kind of sneaky strategy for an impossible problem.
Okay, first up, Section 1, America's impossible debt. Before we get into the how, we really need to understand why the debt has gotten so out of control that it would force such a wild solution in the first place.
The key concept you got to grasp here is something called fiscal dominance. Basically, this is the point where the government's debt is so gigantic that the Federal Reserve, the central bank, loses its independence. Its number one job is no longer fighting inflation. Its number one job becomes making sure the government doesn't go broke from its own interest payments.
And this slide just lays out the trap perfectly. The Fed is stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, the interest payments on that $38 trillion would explode. The government could actually default. So they're pretty much forced to take the other path: keep rates low, let inflation run wild, and essentially save the government at the expense of your savings account.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't the first time America has been in this kind of mess. Not at all. There's a playbook for this, and it was written way back after World War II.
Just look at these numbers. In 1946, U.S. debt was more than 100% of the entire economy's output. But fast forward to 1974, and it's down to just 23%. So what happened? Did they pay it all back? Not a chance. They liquidated it. They basically melted it away over 30 years.
So how'd they pull it off? It was a surprisingly simple three-step recipe. First, the Fed put a cap on how high the interest rates on government bonds could go. Second, they just let inflation run much hotter than those interest rates. And the result? The real value of their mountain of debt just shrank, year after year. It was a slow, silent transfer of wealth from people who saved money to the government. Okay, Section 3, the 2025 debt machine. So how is all this relevant today? Well, according to this theory, the government has dusted off that old playbook and created a new, high-tech version for our time. And the engine for this modern strategy is supposedly built around two new laws, passed back in the summer of 2025. On the surface, they look like pretty standard legislation, but their real purpose, if you believe this theory, is way more strategic. So, the first piece is this thing called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA. It was sold to the public as a stimulus package, tax cuts and all that. But its real strategic goal was supposedly to create a gigantic, permanent deficit. Why would you do that? To pump so much money into the system that inflation is guaranteed to stay high. This creates that critical wedge, where the economy is growing at, say, 6%, but interest rates are held down at 3%. That gap is where the debt just melts away. But wait. To keep those interest rates low when inflation is high, you need someone to buy all your bonds, right? You need a captive audience. Well, that's where the second law comes in, the Genius Act. It sounds like some boring crypto regulation, but the fine print is everything. It forces all U.S. stablecoin companies, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars, to back their digital coins only with cash and U.S. Treasury bills. This law, the theory goes, literally weaponizes the entire crypto market, turning it into a forced buyer for government debt. It's how they solve the who's gonna fund us problem. This whole setup represents a massive shift. The strategist Russell Napier has a name for it: national capitalism. And it's a world where money doesn't flow to the best ideas or the most efficient companies anymore. No, instead capital gets directed to wherever the government needs it to go. And right now, that's to fund its own debt. The free market isn't in charge anymore, the Treasury is. So let's move on to Section 4,
a stealth tax on you. We've been talking about these huge, abstract government moves, but how does this actually hit your bank account? Because this isn't just a theory, it's a direct tax on your wealth.
This chart just makes it painfully simple. This is the stealth tax, right here. If inflation is chugging along at 6%, but your savings account is only paying you 3%, well, you're losing 3% of your actual purchasing power every single year. Your money is literally worth less at the end of the year than it was at the beginning, even though the number went.
And a policy like this creates very clear winners and losers. The big winner, the government, obviously, as its debt problem magically disappears. Owners of hard assets, things like stocks, real estate, they also do pretty well, because those prices tend to inflate right along with everything else. But the losers, they're the people who save cash, retirees living on a fixed income, and everyday workers who get pushed into higher tax brackets even though their wages aren't really buying more. It just hollows out the middle class.
But this doesn't just stop at America's borders. For our last section, let's zoom out and look at the global fallout from a strategy like this, because this is a really high-stakes gamble with America's standing in the world. For decades, the U.S. has had this incredible superpower. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. But financial repression means you are intentionally devaluing that currency. So why would other countries keep holding a currency that you've guaranteed is going to lose value? The source claims this is supercharging the global move away from the dollar, as countries all over the world start looking for better alternatives.
And this right here is the ultimate trade-off, isn't it? To solve its immediate catastrophic debt problem, the United States is essentially cashing in its long-term financial reputation and the special status of the dollar. It's a move you only make when you feel like you're out of other options.
So we'll end on this question. If this theory is even partially correct, and the government has built a machine designed to devalue cash and savings, it changes all the rules. It forces every single one of us to rethink what the word safe even means when it comes to our money. The great devaluation, as the source calls it, might not be coming. It might already be here.